Today we're talking about 2.2, the New England Colonies. So we have Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New Hampshire. So first off, we're going to talk about the Great Migration. So that started in 1620, lasted till 1640. And the Great Migration refers to the migration of English Puritans coming to Massachusetts. So the first group being the Pilgrims. So they came in family groups rather than isolated individuals, and were mainly motivated for freedom to practice their religious beliefs. So that was the main reason that the Pilgrims left England to come to the New World, was they wanted to escape the Church of England. So why the New England colonies were created. So religion was the number one reason for the New England colonies being created. Puritans, they are people who came to the New World so they could build a purified version of the Church of England. So the Church of England was a Roman Catholic church at the time, and these Puritans that were coming to the New World, they were trying to create what was known as a Protestant church. So just some differences between a Protestant church and a Catholic church. The Protestant church has a pope, okay, or in the Church of England, it also had the king also in charge of the church, where a Protestant church does not have a pope that is in charge. And then another thing is that the Protestant church teaches directly from the Bible, where the Catholic church would teach from the Bible, but then also have other church teachings that they would use that could be influenced by the government or the king. So there's two types of Puritans. First off, we have the separatists, and they wanted to leave the Church of England and make a completely new type of church. They wanted to separate completely from the Church of England. And an example of that would be the Pilgrims in Plymouth. They came to the New World to build a new church that did not replicate the Church of England at all. And then you have non-separatists that wanted to make a purified version, a similar version of the Church of England. And that would be the Puritans that we're going to talk about today that come to Boston. So they're going to, instead of making a Roman Catholic church, they're going to make a Protestant church, which has some similarities. So the first colony we're going to talk about is the Massachusetts Bay Colony, later just known as Massachusetts. So we have John Winthrop. He's going to be the leader of these non-separatists. He's going to lead 1,000 non-separatist Puritans to the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which later becomes the town of Boston, Massachusetts. And he's going to call his colony and his town, he wanted it to be known as a role model colony, calling Boston the city upon a hill, meaning that he thought that he was better than everyone else, and that he thought that his town, his colony, was better than everyone else. So it was similar to a country club top status, to where, if you could not live up to these high expectations, you were not welcomed, and that, these Puritans live in there, that they were supposed to be the role model for everyone else, that everyone else should strive to try to be like John Winthrop's colony and like Boston. So Puritans here in Boston, they lived with the highest of standards. If you could not meet those standards, you were kicked out of the colony. Like in England, the government and the church were controlled by the same people in Massachusetts and in Boston. So Puritans, their top two priorities were number one, church, and then number two, education. So the Puritans, they cared more about education than anyone else in this time period. An example of that is they created Harvard in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1636, which was a long time ago. And, it's still one of the most prestigious colleges today in all the United States. And it was the Puritans that made it way back then, because they did think education was very important. A lot of colonies, the women stopped going to college. They did not go to college, and that they also stopped going to grade school around 12 years old, because then they would start staying at home and learning from their mother how to cook and clean. But not the Puritans. The Puritans, they believed that even women should continue grade school, all the way up until 15, 16, 17 years old. Now it was mostly just the men that went to college, because they were the ones that were expected to be leaders and business owners. Next, we have Rhode Island. So Roger Williams was a Puritan minister in Boston, so he worked for the church, but he believed that the church had too much power, and this was, not a popular belief in the church. The church, is not going to like him voicing his opinion about this, and that, the church wants everyone to support them, and that, they think that they should have all the power. And Roger Williams disagreed. He thought that the church and the government should be separated, which is something that we have today. But at this time period, coming from England, this was not a popular belief. And so Roger Williams is going to be kicked out of Boston along with Anne Hutchinson, and they're going to lead a group of supporters to Providence, Rhode Island in 1636, and that's how you get the creation of the Rhode Island colony. So now Rhode Island did have two unique characteristics, one being that the American Indians were treated more respectfully and they were paid for their land. So this is just like we've talked about William Penn with the Quakers and how he purchased land from the Indians also, even though he didn't have to. Roger Williams is going to do the same. He thinks that these if these Indians are going to get pushed off their land, that they deserve something from it. And then number two, true religious toleration, meaning that this is a religious refuge and that the colonists were allowed to practice any religion they wanted in Rhode Island, which was not the case in Massachusetts. Next colony we have is Connecticut. So Connecticut is going to be a lot like Rhode Island. You're going to have another person kicked out of Boston. This time it'll be Thomas Hooker, who was a Puritan minister and thought that the church shouldn't also be the government. So he kind of had some similar viewpoints as Roger Williams. And so Hooker and his followers are going to establish a new colony in what's known as Connecticut, okay, setting up Hartford, the community there. So we're going to talk about the fundamental orders of Connecticut. And this is very important because it's America's first written constitution or set of laws. Thomas Hooker becomes known as the father of democracy for this. So the Orders of Connecticut as a set of laws that expanded the idea of representative government, which we have today. It's where you elect people to represent you in government, and that's where you get political parties, that Republicans are going to want to elect Republicans that have the same viewpoint as them, and then, they're going to fight for what you want. And then same thing with Democrats. A Democrat is going to most of the time nominate another Democrat to represent them in government. So the fundamental orders of Connecticut extended voting rights to non-church members and limited the government. So Thomas Hooker, with this being his colony, he could have very easily had as much power as he wanted. Instead, he's going to basically limit his own power by creating the fundamental orders of Connecticut. And he's also going to allow any man in Connecticut to vote, to where before this, most of the time you had to be a man and you had to work in the church in order to vote, but not in Connecticut. And the last colony we're going to talk about today is New Hampshire. So mainly the main thing about New Hampshire is they're just going to basically break away from Massachusetts. They're not as strict as Massachusetts, definitely not as strict as the people in Boston. They're not the colony upon a hill or the city upon a hill, that they're going to have a little more diversity to them and not be near as strict, but it's still going to be mostly Puritans living in New Hampshire. So you can see the map here in 1650. You have Massachusetts Bay, you have Plymouth. Plymouth will eventually just become part of Massachusetts. And then you have Rhode Island, you have Connecticut, and you have New Hampshire up in the north. Now, something interesting at this time, up here where it says Maine, okay, it actually says part of Mass. That means Maine was at this time part of Massachusetts. Maine was not yet a state or not yet a colony. And we'll talk about when Maine does become a state in the U.S. later on. But for now, think of Massachusetts as being both in Massachusetts today and in Maine. So we're going to talk about the Puritans versus the Indians. So the Puritans, they come to the Massachusetts area, and just like the Pilgrims in Plymouth, John Winthrop's Puritans depended on the Indians for survival early on. So, just like the Pilgrims arrived, in late 1620, and the winters were cold, and they depended on the Indians for survival. And you're going to have Indians like Squanto, who's going to move into their colony and help them survive. So Winthrop's Puritans are going to need the support of the Indian colony or the Indian tribes also to survive early on. Help them how to, show them how to farm, show them how to grow some food. But then once Boston is established enough that they no longer need the help of the Indians, they're going to quickly end that relationship. And that's because the Indians were not Christians. Therefore, the Puritans believed that if they didn't have the same belief as you, that you were wrong. Therefore, the Puritans thought that the Indians, were wrong by not being Christians, and therefore they did not want a relationship with them. They did not want a friendship with them. And as the European population grew in the New England colonies, tension between the Puritans and the Indians grew also. And we know that when you have tension between two things, most of the time it ends up in some type of fight, in this case, a war. So we have King Philip's War. Now, I do think that the title of King Philip is kind of misleading. So when you think of King Philip, do not be thinking of a king over in Europe. In this case, King Philip is actually an Indian. So his Indian name is Metacom, and he is the Wampanoag Indian leader. And so this is a picture of him here. And this is the same Indian tribe that helped the Pilgrims in Plymouth. So if you remember, you had Squanto that came and lived with the Indians, and Squanto was part of the Wampanoag tribe. And eventually, you're going to have Metacom or King Philip, it's all the same person. He's going to basically stand up to these Europeans because he realizes that these Europeans are more and more coming over to the New World and taking his land. And so he's going to try to stand up to them, along with some other Indian tribes are going to join in the battle. And but they're unsuccessful. Their weapons are not near as good as the Europeans. So the Europeans win, and there was, as a result, a large amount of land along the East Coast is basically going to open up, because much of these Indians will get captured and turned to slaves, or they'll be forced off their land. And so now with the Indians kind of out of the picture along the East Coast, now that is more room for more Europeans to come over and settle. So the Indians are no longer a threat to England's exploration along the East Coast and the 13 colonies. Next, we're going to have the Salem witch trials. So Salem is a town in Massachusetts, just north of Boston. And there are 3 sick girls that have these seizures that at the time the doctors didn't know what were causing them. They didn't know the reason behind it. But these girls are going to start accusing local residents of using witchcraft to basically create these seizures. And because of that, these people in Massachusetts, they're going to start getting scared. They're going to hear the stories about people performing witchcraft, and that you hear the name Salem witch trials. That's exactly what happens. They take these people to court, and they're going to have a trial. Now, over the next couple of years, there's going to be 150 different people accused of performing witchcraft. So 29 of them were convicted, 19 were hung and executed, and then at least 6 more died in prison. But both people and dogs were executed for accusing witchcraft. So yes, even dogs were executed because some of these people claim that these dogs were performing witchcraft as well. And long story short, they didn't know what were causing the seizures, so they blamed witchcraft. They thought that the witchcraft was people having the ability to make the devil take possession of them or possess them, and these Puritans are terrified of that happening to them, so they're going to execute both people and dogs, trying to get rid of this witchcraft in Massachusetts, which today we know there was no such thing as witchcraft. So last slide here, we're going to talk about the economy of the New England colonies. So how does the New England colonies make their money? So New England colonies had poor, rocky soil and a short growing season due to the weather being too cold. And so farming is very difficult. So how do people in New England make money? There's 5 different ways here. One by shipbuilding. Okay, so they have some ports. They're close to the ocean, and they have lots of trees. So they're going to make wooden ships using the lumber. They're going to sell lumber also, especially over to Europe. And then they're going to fish. Some of the best fishing waters in the world are just off the coast to the northeast of present-day Maine. And then you got whaling, which is whale hunting. And then you have commercial trade in the Boston Harbor, which is a major port city. So the port city of Boston is going to have lots of ships coming in and out. There's a picture of it here. Lots of ships coming in and out every day that are going to be, having imports that come in from Europe, that come in from England, exports that are being sent back to the old world of, the Columbian Exchange, where they're constantly trading back and forth, and they're going to need people in the port to work. And so there's going to be many people that are going to work in the port that are going to load ships, unload ships, and help with the imports and exports.